Every church basement in America once had a wall of trembling color on a folding table, not decoration, the centerpiece. Grandma carried it in with both hands, set it down like something holy, and the whole room went quiet for a second. Then, somewhere in the 1980s, it became a joke. A punchline at a food blog's expense, mocked by people who never had to stretch a grocery budget for a family of 6. Nobody laughing ever tasted what she was actually building. 25 dishes, one vanished tradition. We're walking the whole table tonight, number 25. Buttermilk Jello salad tart. Cold. Almost savory under the sweet. In the South and the Midwest through the 1960s and 70s, a box of lime Jello cost about 19 cents, and a cup of buttermilk was already sitting in the icebox from Sunday's biscuits. Whip them together, chill it in a ring mold overnight, and you got something that shouldn't have worked and did. Sharp enough to cut through a heavy Sunday dinner of ham and gravy. This was not dessert. This was chemistry, worked out by a woman with no lab and no degree, just a spoon, a cold cellar, and 40 years of paying attention to what her family would actually finish. Number 24. Congealed fruit cocktail Salada, 15-cent can of fruit cocktail, suspended in orange Jello, crowned with a spoonful of sour cream nobody could really afford in 1951, but bought anyway, because this dish was going to the church supper and reputation mattered more than the grocery bill that week. The sour cream wasn't decoration. It was the one luxury a family let itself have, dressed up as garnish so nobody at the potluck table would call it what it was. Cut into squares, it held its shape on a paper plate for hours in July heat, which is more than most modern desserts can claim. Number 23. 7-Up Salad A 10-cent bottle of 7-Up poured hot into lemon gelatin, folded with crushed pineapple and shredded cheddar cheese. Southern kitchens ran on this trick through the 1960s and 70s. Soda as an ingredient, not a treat, because carbonation was cheaper than a second flavor, and the fizz did work a plain syrup couldn't. The cheddar sounds strange until you taste it against the tang of the lemon and pineapple. Nobody in that kitchen called it clever. They just called it Tuesday, and they made it because a 2-liter bottle went further split into a mold than it did split into glasses. Number 22. Green stuff no formal name. Every family in the Midwest just called it that from the 1950s into the 70s. Pistachio pudding, crushed pineapple, marshmallow, sometimes cottage cheese folded in when the budget was tight that month. It didn't need a name because everybody already knew which bowl it was, sitting third from the left on the dessert table between the deviled eggs and the coffee urn. Grandma just called it the green stuff, and it showed up at every funeral, every reunion, every Sunday after church, unchanged for 30 years, because nobody ever asked her to change it. Number 21. Orange fluff salad orange Jello, whipped topping, mandarin oranges, and a container of cottage cheese folded in so smooth you'd never guess it was there. That cottage cheese was protein, stretched into a dessert bowl so the kids would eat it without a fight at the Sunday table. Today, a health food shop sells nearly the same combination in a plastic cup and calls it a protein parfait for $9. She was doing it for free in 1965 with a mixing bowl and a wooden spoon, and nobody ever thanked her for solving a nutrition problem she never called a nutrition problem. Number 20. Bing Cherry Cola Salad, not to be confused with the plain cola version that came later. This one was the church lady upgrade, the dish you brought when you wanted people to know you'd tried harder than everybody else on the table. Bing cherries, dark cola, a layer of sweetened cream cheese folded through the middle like a secret nobody was supposed to notice until the first slice came off. Deep South kitchens built this one for funerals and Christmas through the 1950s and 60s, and it took 2 full days to assemble properly. 1 day to set the base, a full night in the icebox, 1 more day for the cream layer to firm without weeping through the cherry gelatin. Nobody rushed it. You didn't rush a dish that was going to sit on a table next to a casket, in front of people who would remember exactly how it tasted for the rest of their lives. The cola gave the gelatin a bitter backbone underneath all that cherry sweetness, dark as coffee left too long on the stove, and the first cut always went to whoever had traveled the farthest to be there. Nobody had to say that rule out loud. Everybody at the table already knew it. Number 19. Snickers salad. By the 1980s, 35-cent candy bars were getting chopped into whipped topping and diced green apple, folded together in a big glass bowl, and carried into potlucks that everyone swore were the last real ones that year, and every year after that, somebody said the same thing. This is the proof the tradition didn't die when people say it died. It just got quieter, cheaper, faster to assemble, buried under a layer of irony that made people call it a guilty pleasure instead of a Sunday staple. The candy bar chunks froze slightly in the whipped topping, giving each bite a little resistance nobody expected from a salad, right up until the whole idea went quiet for good. It was the last flicker of a tradition that had already been dying for a decade by then, dressed up in a candy wrapper so nobody at the potluck would call it what it really was. One more grandmother finding one more way to stretch a bowl of whipped topping across a table full of grandchildren who'd stopped asking for the old recipes and started asking for this one instead. Number 18. Vegetable mosaic mold-diced carrot, celery, green pepper, and pimento, suspended in savory tomato aspic like stained glass caught mid-fall. Church suppers across the country built these through the 1940s and 50s as the vegetable course, dressed up as a centerpiece, so nobody at the table felt like they were eating their vegetables at all. They felt like they were eating something a caterer might have made, even though it came out of a 5-cent packet of unflavored gelatin and a can of tomato juice. It was nutrition wearing a party dress, cut into wedges and fanned out on a plate lined with lettuce leaves that nobody actually ate, but everyone agreed made it look finished. The aspic itself had a faint bite of black pepper and a little vinegar worked in, sharp enough to wake up a table full of ham and biscuits, and it stood up next to the sweeter dishes without ever apologizing for being the savory one. A church supper wasn't complete without at least 2 of these on the table, side by side, cut into identical wedges so nobody could accuse the hostess of favoring one family's plate over another. Number 17. Golden Glow salad shredded carrot, crushed pineapple, orange Jello, a dish born in the 1930s that looked like dessert and functioned like medicine. Vitamin A, hidden in a wobbling gold mold, fed to children who would never have touched a plain boiled carrot, no matter how hungry they got. That is not a coincidence. That is a Depression-era mother solving a nutrition problem with nothing but a hand grater and a box of gelatin, decades before anyone paid a nutritionist a salary to say the words "fortified food" out loud in a government pamphlet. The carrot's natural sweetness did half the work. The pineapple did the rest, and the children never once suspected they'd been outsmarted. By 1938, county extension agents were handing out mimeographed recipe sheets built around exactly this kind of substitution. Sweet fruit disguising a vegetable a family desperately needed, but a child would refuse on sight, and Golden Glow salad was one of the recipes that traveled farthest, from rural Kansas kitchens all the way to relief agency cookbooks distributed in cities that had never smelled a carrot patch in their lives. Number 16. Ribbon salad 3 or 4 colors, poured one at a time, each layer set for a full hour before the next one went in on top. A single ribbon salad could take an entire afternoon in a 1950s church kitchen. Cherry, then lime, then a white layer of sweetened cream, stacked like something out of a jewelry case in a downtown department store window. Nobody was paid for that time. It was given freely, layer by layer, standing at the icebox door checking every 20 minutes to see if the last color had firmed enough to hold the next one, because patience was the only ingredient in that whole recipe that never cost a single cent. Cut wrong, a single unset layer would bleed color into the one below it and ruin the whole afternoon's work. So the good knife stayed clean and dry on the counter until the very last layer had firmed all the way through. A ribbon salad on the table meant a woman had planned her entire Saturday around a dessert, hour by hour, and everybody eating it that Sunday knew exactly what that kind of planning cost her. Number 15. Under the sea salad, shredded cabbage and grated carrot, suspended in lime gelatin, poured into a fish-shaped mold if the family happened to own one. And if they didn't, a plain loaf pan worked just as well, and nobody said a word about it. Nationwide through the 1950s, this was vegetables smuggled past a picky child in the shape of a treat. The cabbage's bite softened just enough by the sweet gelatin that most kids never registered. They were eating something their mother had been trying to get into them for a week straight. She never called it a trick. She called it supper, and she served it without comment, watching from the stove to see if the plate came back clean. The cabbage kept a faint crunch even after hours in the icebox, a texture that told you it hadn't been boiled to death like most vegetables in that decade, and the lime gelatin around it tasted almost like a green apple candy if you didn't think too hard about what was actually suspended inside it. It worked because she never announced the vegetables. She just served them and let the fish-shaped mold do the convincing. Number 14. Ham and egg salad, mold-diced ham, hard-boiled egg, and savory unflavored gelatin, unmolded onto a lettuce leaf for the ladies' luncheon circuit of the 1950s, sliced thin enough that a single loaf pan could feed a whole committee meeting with room to spare. Today, a restaurant plates something nearly identical, calls it a charcuterie terrine, adds a smear of grain mustard, and charges $22 a slice at a table with linen napkins. She made it in a battered tin loaf pan for a church committee that met every second Tuesday, and never once thought to put her name on the recipe card, because the recipe card wasn't the point. Feeding the room was the point. She'd score the top of the loaf into neat squares, with a warm knife dipped in water between each cut, so every committee member got an identical slice, and nobody could say she'd shorted them. Savory gelatin never got the same reputation as the sweet molds, but in a room full of women who took the church budget seriously, this was the dish that stretched a pound of ham further than anything else on the table that Tuesday. Number 13. Seafoam salad lime Jello, whipped with cream cheese until it turned pale and airy, folded with canned pear until the whole thing looked like something that belonged in a jewelry box, not a refrigerator door. Midwest and Southern tables built this through the 1950s, and the texture is the thing people remember first. Not the flavor, not even the color, but the specific wobble of it, the way a serving spoon sank in and left a clean, glassy edge behind that held its shape all the way to the table. Grandchildren who can't recall a single word their grandmother said can still describe that exact texture, 60 years later, without hesitation. The canned pear had to be drained thoroughly first, patted dry on a clean dish towel, or the whole mixture would separate overnight, and she'd have to start over from the beginning with a fresh box of gelatin she couldn't always spare. Getting it right meant knowing her own kitchen, the exact shelf in the icebox that ran coldest, the exact hour the cream cheese needed to sit out before it would whip properly. Number 12. Lime Jello cottage cheese, salad lime gelatin, cottage cheese, crushed pineapple, sometimes a few chopped walnuts folded in at the very end for a little resistance against the soft curds. Midwest kitchens through the 1950s and 60s built this one so often it barely needed a recipe card anymore. Muscle memory did the measuring. Grandma just called it the lime salad, never once mentioning out loud that a single serving carried more protein than the meatloaf sitting 3 inches away from it on the same table. Nobody credited the cottage cheese. It just did its job quietly, folded in and disappearing into the color and sweetness the way she did most things, necessary, unglamorous, and completely unacknowledged. A big rectangular pan of it lasted a family 3 days in the icebox, cut into squares and pulled out for lunch, for a snack after school, for a light supper on the hottest nights of July, when nobody wanted the stove running. It never made it onto a fancy platter. It lived in the same dented Pyrex dish for a decade, and everybody in that house knew exactly which shelf to find it on. They knew things about gelatin that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. During and after rationing, both Knox and Jello ran advertising built on real documented nutrition science. Gelatin is almost pure protein, derived from collagen, and home economists in the 1940s taught women in extension courses that a molded salad could stretch a family's protein budget on nights when meat was either unavailable or simply too expensive to put on the table. It wasn't a gimmick dreamed up to move product. It was taught, tested, and printed in government pamphlets distributed through county extension offices, alongside instructions on canning and rationing coupons. A wobbling bowl set on a folding table was never just a centerpiece for company. It was a working piece of wartime nutrition science, engineered to stretch protein across a family that couldn't afford to waste a single ounce of it, and almost nobody alive today remembers that it once carried that weight. Nutrition bulletins from the era specifically recommended gelatin desserts for children and expectant mothers, citing the protein content in language that sounds almost clinical now, closer to something you'd find on a modern supplement label than a 1940s dessert recipe. A dish we now associate with kitsch and nostalgia was, for a real stretch of American history, treated by actual scientists as a legitimate solution to a real nutritional shortfall, and it worked exactly as intended for millions of families who never once thought of it as anything other than supper. Number 11. Cranberry orange relish mold hole cranberries, orange zest, and unflavored gelatin set into a ring mold and turned out onto a platter every November from the 1940s through the 1960s, the tartness cutting straight through a table, loaded down with turkey, gravy, and stuffing. This is the one mold that survived the collapse of the whole tradition, but only for a single day a year, only at Thanksgiving, stripped of every single dish that used to stand beside it on tables all across the country. It outlived the entire family of recipes it came from, and almost nobody setting it out today knows it once had 24 siblings. Whole raw cranberries popped faintly as they cooked down, releasing a tartness sharp enough to cut through pan drippings and cornbread stuffing alike, and the ring shape left a hollow center that got filled with fresh orange segments right before it hit the table. It's the one survivor because it earned a permanent seat at exactly one meal a year, while every other mold on this list lost its seat at every meal entirely. Number 10. Broken glass salad cubes of red, green, and yellow gelatin, suspended in a white pineapple cream layer, cut to look like stained glass caught in a block of ice under kitchen light. Nationwide through the 1950s and 60s, this dish dressed poverty up as opulence on purpose, cheap boxed gelatin in 3 different flavors, cubed and arranged with enough patience and care that it looked like something lifted from a downtown jewelry counter, instead of assembled at a kitchen table with a paring knife and a mixing bowl. Every cube had to be cut precisely square, the edges clean, or the whole illusion fell apart the moment the mold turned out onto the platter. Some women kept a dedicated knife just for this dish, sharpened the night before, because a ragged cube looked like carelessness, and carelessness was the one thing nobody wanted whispered about them after the potluck ended. Number 9. Strawberry pretzels, salad crushed pretzels, and melted butter pressed firmly into a crust, cream cheese and whipped topping layered on next, strawberry Jello and fresh sliced berries poured on top and left to set overnight in the coldest part of the icebox. A 20-cent bag of pretzels built the entire salty foundation. Salt, fat, sugar, stacked in that exact order, and never once written down as a formula. Midwest and Southern kitchens perfected the balance through the 1960s and 70s through trial and error at church suppers, decades before a restaurant menu called the same idea a deconstructed cheesecake and charged $12 a slice for something a woman built for free out of a bag of pretzels she'd already opened for the kids' lunches. The salt in the crust was the whole trick. It kept the dish from tipping into pure sugar the way a plain cheesecake would. The pretzels had to stay just crisp enough at the bottom that they didn't turn to mush overnight under the weight of the cream cheese layer. Get the ratio wrong, and you had soup. Get it right, and you had a dish that disappeared off the potluck table before the ham did. Number 8. 24-hour fruit salad named for the labor, not the flavor. Canned fruit, marshmallow, whipped cream, folded together and left in the icebox for a full day so the flavors could marry properly, the marshmallows softening slowly into something closer to custard than candy. Nationwide through the 1950s, a family started this dish on Friday afternoon for a Saturday dinner, planning it into the week the same way they planned church and grocery shopping. Because good food back then wasn't rushed to fit a schedule. It was the schedule. Whatever fruit was cheapest that week went in. Canned peaches one month, pineapple the next, whatever the grocer had marked down on Thursday. And the dish never tasted quite the same twice, which nobody minded, because the point was never precision. The point was a full day of the marshmallow, slowly dissolving into the cream until the whole bowl turned into something halfway between a fruit salad and a custard, richer than either one alone. Number 7. Waldorf Jello salad apple, celery, and walnut. The same combination first served at a Manhattan hotel dining room in the 1890s. For guests who could afford an evening there, folded into gelatin, and carried into working-class kitchens by the 1930s until it belonged to everyone. A dish built for the wealthy got copied, stretched with cheaper apples and fewer walnuts, and democratized until a coal miner's wife in eastern Kentucky was serving the same flavor combination that once sat on white tablecloths in New York City, for a fraction of the price, with none of the credit and none of the linen. The gelatin base changed everything about the dish's texture. Where the original relied on mayonnaise alone to bind it, the working-class version could be made a day ahead, sliced clean for a crowd, and stretched with an extra apple or two when the walnuts ran short that week. The flavor traveled 50 years in several tax brackets and somehow arrived at the same table, tasting almost exactly like it started. Number 6. Shrimp mold canned shrimp, cream cheese, tomato soup, and unflavored gelatin set into a fish-shaped mold and unmolded whole at the center of a southern or coastal church supper table through the 1950s and 60s, the pale pink standing out against every other dish on the table. One dish feeding a whole room off a few small cans of shrimp, stretching them into a centerpiece that looked like it cost far more than it actually did to put together. Today, a restaurant does nearly the same thing, calls it a shrimp terrine, plates 3 careful bites on a slate board, and charges $28 for what she used to make in a $5 mold and call an appetizer for 40 people. Unmolding it was the moment of real risk. Flip the pan too soon, and the whole shape collapsed on the platter in front of the entire congregation. Flip it too late, and it wouldn't release at all. A woman who could turn a shrimp mold out clean, whole, on the first try, earned a kind of quiet respect at that table that no restaurant certificate could touch. That is not progress. That is a generation's kitchen labor getting mocked by people who never had to feed a family of 6 on $9 a week and figure it out. anyway. Starting in the 2000s and accelerating hard through the 2010s, food media and internet culture turned these exact dishes into a running punchline: ambrosia horror, vintage recipe fails, entire slideshows built for nothing but laughing at an old photograph pulled from a church cookbook. Nobody writing those articles ever asked who made the dish, why she made it, or what it cost her in hours and cents to put something genuinely beautiful on a table with almost nothing to work with. They just laughed, collected the clicks, and moved on, and the women who spent 30 years perfecting this tradition never got a single chance to answer back. Most of the women who actually built these recipes were already gone by the time the internet found the photographs and decided they were funny. No byline to credit, no name to attach to the mockery, just an anonymous church cookbook scan and a comment section piling on. It's easy to laugh at a stranger's dish. It's a lot harder to laugh once you know she was stretching $2 into dinner for $6 and still finding a way to make it look like a celebration. Number 5. Ambrosia mold orange segments, coconut, marshmallow, and sometimes a splash of maraschino cherry juice, folded into gelatin and served every Christmas across the South through the 1950s and 60s, always in the good glass bowl that only came out twice a year. This wasn't a side dish. This was a whole family's Christmas, built into one bowl and passed around the table before anyone touched the turkey, remembered by grandchildren decades later, who couldn't tell you what the ham tasted like that year, but could describe the exact sweetness of the ambrosia, right down to the coconut catching between their teeth, making it meant peeling and segmenting oranges by hand at the counter the night before, a job usually handed to whichever grandchild was old enough to be trusted with a paring knife, and the whole kitchen smelled like citrus and coconut for a full day before Christmas dinner ever started. It wasn't a recipe passed down on paper. It was a job passed down at a counter, one December at a time, until the grandchild doing the peeling became the grandmother giving the instructions. Number 4. Coca-Cola Salada 5-cent bottle of Coca-Cola, cherry Jello, pecans, and dark sweet cherries, set together into a dish that showed up at Southern church suppers all through the 1950s and 60s, poured while the cola was still fizzing, so the bubbles worked themselves into the gelatin before it set. The soda fountain downtown and the potluck table at church ran on the exact same ingredient, and nobody thought that was strange in the slightest. It was just what was already sitting in the icebox, waiting to be used before it went flat. The pecans went in whole or roughly broken, never chopped fine, because a woman feeding a table of 8 wasn't going to spend 20 minutes at the cutting board over a garnish. The dark cherries bled just slightly into the surrounding gelatin, leaving faint red streaks through the mold that made it look handmade in a way a store-bought dessert never could, because it was. Number 3. Watergate salad pistachio pudding, crushed pineapple, whipped topping, and chopped pecans, first appearing at Potlucks in the late 1970s under a name that had nothing to do with the recipe and everything to do with whatever was leading the evening news that year. The scandal faded from front pages within a decade. The name stuck to the salad forever, and somewhere along the way, a dish that was sweet, easy, and genuinely good got treated like a joke because of 4 syllables attached to it that it never once deserved and had absolutely nothing to do with. The pale green color and the crunch of pecans against the soft pudding base made it one of the easiest dishes on this entire list to assemble. No cooking required, no gelatin to set overnight, which is exactly why it spread so fast through office potlucks and church suppers alike in the years right after the name attached itself. It survived the joke. It just never got its dignity back. Number 2. Tomato aspic tomato juice, gelatin, celery, and a hint of lemon, set firm and unmolded onto a bed of lettuce at Southern church luncheons through the 1940s and 50s, served cold on the hottest afternoons of the year when nobody wanted anything heavy on their plate. This was not a dessert wearing a savory costume, the way half this list has been. This was a savory dish that refused to apologize for itself, sharp, tart, cold, built for women who understood that not every course on the table had to be sweet in order to be worth serving with pride. The lemon had to be measured carefully, just enough to lift the tomato without turning the whole thing sour, and the celery went in finely diced, so it never fought the smooth set of the aspic underneath it. It demanded a confident hand and a willingness to serve something that looked, to a stranger, like it might be dessert and tasted nothing like it. Almost nobody makes it anymore, because almost nobody left has the nerve, number one. Perfection salad cabbage, celery, and pimento suspended in clear gelatin, first served in a New York kitchen in 1905 and copied into working-class kitchens by the 1920s until it became a staple clear through the 1950s in houses that had never seen the inside of the hotel it was born in. Every single dish on this list, all 24 before it, traces its bloodline directly back to this one bowl. It started as a wealthy woman's dinner party trick and ended up on a Kentucky sharecropper's table, unchanged in spirit even as the ingredients had to change with whatever was affordable that season. Grandma just called it salad. She had no idea she was serving the beginning of an 80-year tradition every time she set it on the table. The pimento added the only real color to an otherwise pale, glassy dish, small red flecks suspended in clear gelatin like something preserved on purpose, and the cabbage kept just enough crunch to remind you it had once been a raw vegetable before it became something closer to art. Every single item on this countdown, from the buttermilk salad all the way through the shrimp mold, is a direct descendant of this one bowl, invented for people who never once imagined it would end up on a coal miner's supper table 2 decades later. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Closing, slice the pretzel crust. Layer the ribbon salad, color by color, an hour of waiting between each one. Turn the shrimp mold out onto the platter, whole, in front of the whole church, and watch it hold its shape. These were never sad little dishes made, because there was nothing better available. They were engineered, patience stretched into protein, thrift dressed up as celebration, a hand grater and a mixing bowl doing the work of a food scientist decades before anyone paid one to say it out loud in a lab coat. And the food industry that built this tradition to sell more boxes off the shelf walked away from it the second it stopped being profitable, leaving the women who perfected it over 3 decades to be laughed at online by people who never once had to feed a family on pennies and make it look like a celebration. That is not a coincidence. That is theft dressed up as changing taste. A whole tradition built by women with almost nothing, mocked by a culture that has almost everything and still can't stretch $1 the way she could. She's not here to defend the recipe box anymore. So we're doing it for her, one dish at a time. Starting tonight, comment below and tell me which one your grandmother made. Number 20. Martha White's Self-Rising Cornmeal, Nashville, Tennessee, 1899. The leavening was already mixed in, baking powder and salt, measured once at the mill instead of measured every single morning by a woman who was already awake before the sun, feeding 6 children before she'd eaten a bite herself. 15 cents a bag in the 1930s, and that 15 cents bought her back minutes she didn't have to spare. Martha White didn't wait for anyone's permission to make a working mother's morning easier. It just did it, quietly, in 1899, while national brands were still selling plain cornmeal and calling that enough. Today we call it stone-ground artisan cornmeal. Put it in a paper sack with a farm's name printed across the front in a serif font, and charge $9 for the privilege of pretending we invented the idea of convenience. That is not progress. That is a markup on a shortcut her own exhausted mornings invented for free, sold back to her grandchildren at 60 times the price, marketed as heritage instead of what it actually was. Number 19. Cheerwine Salisbury, North Carolina. Born in 1917 out of a wartime sugar shortage that should have killed it before it started. A cherry soda, deep red, bottled by a family that refused every buyout offer for 100 years. In the Carolina Piedmont, Cheerwine sat in the Piggly Wiggly cooler next to the national brands and outsold them on nothing but stubbornness. It wasn't cheaper. It wasn't better advertised. It was just theirs. There's a particular kind of loyalty that doesn't show up in a marketing report. The kind where a family keeps buying a regional soda for 3 generations because their grandmother did, because the taste is tied to a porch, a summer, a person who isn't here anymore. That is not brand recognition. That is memory with a price tag on it, and it is the one thing the national chains could never manufacture, no matter how many focus groups they ran. Number 18. Community Coffee, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 1919. Cap Siraj started it as a single counter in his father's grocery store, grinding coffee beans fresh to order because that was the only way he knew to sell coffee that didn't taste like it had sat in a warehouse for 6 months. No wholesaler between the roaster and the customer. No middleman taking a cut. Just a red tin, dark roasted beans, and a promise that what was inside had been ground the same week it left the store. By the 1930s, that single counter had grown into a full plant, and the red tin had made it onto Piggly Wiggly shelves across South Louisiana. Still family-run, still roasted the exact same way Cap Sorage had done it by hand. A pound cost around 30 cents during the worst years of the Depression. Not the cheapest coffee on the shelf, but the one that got reused. Grounds brewed once, then brewed again the next morning, weaker but still coffee, because nothing in that kitchen got thrown away while it still had something left to give. Nothing wasted. That was the rule long before anyone put a name on it. Number 17. Louisiana Coffee and Chicory, New Orleans, 1902. Though the chicory itself goes back further than the company does. During the Civil War, the Union blockade cut New Orleans off from coffee entirely, and cooks in the city started roasting and grinding chicory root to stretch what little coffee they had left. It was bitter. It was strange. It worked. By the time Louisiana started selling the blend commercially in 1902, what had been a wartime desperation measure had become something the city was proud of. Not a shortage anymore. A recipe, kept on purpose for decades after the reason for it had disappeared. A dime a can by the 1930s, brewed dark enough to stand a spoon upright in the pot, poured over chicory-scalded milk for children. Too young for straight coffee, but old enough to want what the adults were having. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Some of what gets sold today as regional flavor started as nothing more than a city refusing to go without. New Orleans didn't lose the war on coffee. It just found a way to keep drinking through it and never let go of the taste that got them there. Number 16, Nabs. Charlotte, North Carolina, 1913. Peanut butter pressed thin between two crackers and wrapped in wax paper that crinkled in a lunch pail. Sold for a nickel straight off delivery trucks that rolled up to the mill gates before the morning shift because a mill worker didn't have time to walk to a store and back on a 15-minute break. That nickel bought protein, salt, and enough calories to make it to quitting time. Lance built an entire company on that nickel. This was not a snack food. This was fuel engineered for people the food industry never bothered marketing to directly because it didn't need to. The mill whistle did the marketing for them. Number 15. Bama Jelly Gadsden, Alabama, 1910. A jar of grape or apple jelly for a dime at a time when a pound of real butter ran 50 cents and was nowhere near guaranteed to be in the icebox on a given week. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Half of what got called a treat in a Depression-era kitchen was really just arithmetic done quietly, so a child never had to know how close to nothing the family actually had. A biscuit with Bama on it tasted like a gift. It was really a decision, jelly instead of butter, because jelly stretched further and cost less. And a child eating breakfast has no way of knowing the difference between abundance and a mother doing math in her head while she spread it thin enough to make the jar last the month. Bama wasn't dessert, no matter how it tasted going down. It was the difference between a breakfast a child would eat without being told to and one they'd push around the plate. And in a house with 6 mouths to feed, that difference mattered more than anyone outside that kitchen ever understood.